We can turn now instead to Thom Brooks, who is the head of Durham Law School, Durham University, and knows political science, of course, very well. Hi, Thom. Thanks so much for speaking to us. I mean, have you seen a meeting like this before, in which no agenda, no talking points have been set forth, where we're told by the U.S. president himself to keep expectations low?
Never. I mean, it's extraordinary when I think that in my childhood, and I'm not that old, when the American president would meet the head of the Soviet Union, what a big event that was. And of course, there would be a very clear agenda before them. Everyone knew what was going on, and there was much at stake, and it received the attention it deserved. Now we've got Putin and Trump meeting together, and perhaps the only reason they've not released any, they've not confirmed what they're going to be talking about is that we can provide a very long list of things they ought to be talking about inside in their meeting. And I think it's not only extraordinary that they're not telling us what they're doing, it's also extraordinary, of course, that there's a lot of rumors, a Mueller investigation into possible Russian collusion in the American election, and what connections there were between the Trump camp and Putin's people in getting Trump into the White House, or somehow related to that happening. Going on right now. Trump calls it a witch hunt, but the heat is clearly up. Several people are indicted. There are people who are going to prison who are related, who have been part of that investigation. And then you've got other scenarios going on in Syria, where America, under Trump, he wants to have a different kind of change of course. Will something around that be announced? Who knows? I mean, there's clearly been some connections between these sides in the recent past, looking over a little year ago, and the two clearly get along, it would seem, very well. They make time for each other. They speak at length. And I think the most extraordinary thing about this, of course, is, yes, Trump says, you know, keep low expectations and so on, don't know what's going to happen. But I'm sure that he and Putin would not be meeting right now if they did not know exactly what they were going to be doing, what they were going to be talking about, and what they were planning to say when it was all over. Neither of them are, you know, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, they know what the agenda is. Time is too precious for both of them to waste even a single minute. But yeah, it was interesting, Thom, when he was asked about talking to Putin about those 12 intelligence agents that have been indicted in the United States for having meddled in the allegedly meddling in the 2016 election. You know, Trump's response was kind of like, maybe we'll get to it. I'm not making any promises. When had it been under any other administration before this, that could have been the central focus of such a meeting. But that's not the case with Putin. And we were discussing, actually, with our correspondent earlier, that President Trump did not hesitate to criticize NATO, the EU, and British Prime Minister Theresa May before going into meetings with all of them. However, with Putin, that was anything but the case. Do you think it's because he sees the EU, NATO, Prime Minister May as somewhat soft targets in a way Putin is not?
Well, that's possibly the case, that he sees them as soft targets. I think that Trump has certainly been a lot tougher on America's closest allies than he's been against some of its fiercest foes. So Trump has had a lot of negative things to say about Theresa May recently, and where Britain is going, despite his support for Brexit. He's been very negative about the European Union, about NATO, about other developments. At the same time, has lavished praise on Putin, on North Korea's dictator, and others who've been kind of on the other side of the United States for a long time. It's not clear whether or not he just seems to like dealing with authoritarian figures more as a CEO, businessman himself, in top-down structures. Maybe he feels they've got more in common than democratically elected leaders in other places. I suspect, Trump is more seriously is just trying to stir things up and trying to get some movement. I think he definitely seems to give this impression that if he's kind of more engaging and less hostile to folks like Putin and Kim in North Korea, that somehow that will make some kind of big difference and get some positive gains, and how much of this is just a front of a businessman who claims he's very good at getting deals, or how much of this is some kind of naive person who's finding the wrong types of friends is dangerously unknown at the moment. So I think it's hard to tell at this time. But it is I think alarming that the people he claims to have problems with are the same people and groups that Putin claims to have a problem with, and that's something that was true of candidate Trump as much as it's true for the President Trump.
Yeah, they do see eye to eye on a number of things. And what really is interesting, Thom, and tell me where you think this might go. Will they talk about Syria? Now, the United States stood so firmly against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. However, Trump had said before that, hey, if the country was peaceful before, this revolution started, before these protests, maybe Assad wasn't such a bad guy after all. But then still, the U.S., the general line from the United States, just like their allies in Europe, was that Bashar al-Assad really did have to go. Now, though, can you see maybe a bit of political horse trading developing here, and that concessions from Russia could be made on Iran's specific role in Syria, while allowing Russia to perhaps determine, influence, decide Syria's future with Bashar al-Assad going forward?
I'm nervous about making many political predictions these days, but I think that's right. I think that if there is something that the Russians might do, I think they're both going to want to claim some compromise on each side, and they're both going to want to try to claim some credit. I think that Russia is not today going to announce, oh yes, we were definitely meddling in elections in Britain, in the United States, and elsewhere, whatever the evidence is. They're not going to say that. And they've also been very fiercely vocal about how they had nothing to do, they say, with the Novichok poisonings in Britain. So I don't expect them to kind of throw their hands up and say, we found something new, rogue elements, we're going to stop them, don't worry, it won't happen again. I suspect that Syria is going to be a place where there might be the biggest kind of win-win. Trump wants to see the United States completely out of it. He doesn't want America, in a sense where predecessors had kind of seen America having more and more of a presence in the world, and a positive presence in the world. Trump is more isolationist and more nationalistic. I think we'll want to see his troops leave and activity in Syria and the surrounding area withdraw. And one way of kind of getting that win for Trump would be if Putin were to kind of give way or make something happen with Iran's involvement or some type of change on the ground in Syria, that it would seem Putin would be very well placed compared to anyone else to deliver. I suspect that will be the big thing we see from Russia. What exactly the Americans might do, other than not bomb Syria much, it's not quite clear what Trump has up his sleeve, what he's going to offer Putin in order to do something like that. What's Putin going to get for doing something like this that's not necessarily in his strategic interest, or at least as they've seen it so far? That is one of many unknowns with Trump.
Thom, I'll tell you what, we're actually seeing live pictures now from Helsinki where President Trump and Russian President Putin are seated there. Let's listen in. Congratulations.